EvidenceCare exists to sort of fill that void of bringing clinical insights and nudges into the physician's workflow in a way that we can help deliver better care to the patients.
When healthcare systems are just sucking the demand of their time all day, every day, and everywhere but actual patient care, anything you put in front of the physician is going to be met with resistance. No matter how good your technology is, no matter how much you can automate stuff, no matter how much you can make documentation easier, at the end of the day, the physician should be the captain of the ship.
Co-founders Dr. Brian Fengler and Jim Jamieson are the brains behind EvidenceCare, an EHR-integrated platform that optimizes clinical workflows to deliver better patient care, improve physicians' workflow, capture more revenue, and reduce costs.
It is my belief as a physician that the assessment and diagnosis of a patient is where the human element of the art of medicine comes in.
Dr. Fengler left a career as an emergency medicine physician to focus full-time on his work with EvidenceCare in 2016, where he now serves as Chief Medical Officer. Prior to EvidenceCare, Jim Jamieson built and led sales and implementation teams while serving as VP of Business Development for National Revenue Cycle companies, a background that prepared him to serve as Chief Revenue Officer with EvidenceCare.
We're all here to help people, and that's why we're in this phone here. We want, in this podcast, we want to help others do something better for the industry, for themselves, for their family, for their friends. And
now let's join the conversation as Brian and Jim tell us how they've managed to succeed in a crowded healthcare marketplace.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Day Zero. It is my great pleasure today to introduce Jim Jamieson and Dr. Brian Fengler from EvidenceCare. Jim, let's start with you. Folks, love to hear a bit about your background before we get into the nitty-gritty.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Lemoine. I appreciate you making time for us today. Again, Jim Jamieson, I'm co-founder, Chief Revenue Officer at EvidenceCare. Met Brian probably 9 years ago when we kicked around the idea of starting the company based off of a wonderful idea of innovative technology in healthcare that Brian had. I started my career off as a Marine. When I got out of the Marine Corps, I was a defense contractor on and off for about 12 years, doing IT consulting, enterprise architecture. Moved from Washington, D.C. to Nashville, Tennessee in around June of 2006. That's when I tipped my toe in healthcare. My mom and stepfather were in healthcare, physician and nurse, respectively, and was on the revenue cycle side for many years. Large companies, small companies, took a few small companies to successful transactions. And along that journey, through my stepfather's physician, who I'm sure we'll get into today, was one of the first check writers in EvidenceCare, is where I met Brian along the journey, and Brian met him. So ever since I met Brian, it's just been a long ride ever since, and here we are.
Wow. Brian, what's your story?
First off, Rick, thank you so much for giving us the opportunity to chat with you today. Always good to see you. So my background, I grew up in Syracuse, New York. My mother was a nurse, and my father was a teacher, but spent a lot of time at the hospital as a young boy. And so always sort of contemplated a career in medicine. Ended up going to medical school in Syracuse, and then did my residency in emergency medicine at the University of Virginia. When I finished my residency, I moved to Nashville and started practicing for a community hospital here in Nashville in the emergency room. A few years later, actually ended up opening up some urgent care clinics here in Nashville that were staffed by emergency physicians. And just through my practice of medicine in the emergency room and urgent care, kind of saw the market need and the physician need for a tool like EvidenceCare. And that's where the idea for it originally came from.
Good. Thanks for that, both of you. So let's jump right into it. What is EvidenceCare?
So EvidenceCare is a platform that is EHR agnostic with the purpose of helping to enable better care decisions. I think everyone was excited about EHRs 10 years ago when meaningful use first came out. We thought, wow, this is going to be great. We're going to have all this data. We're going to have all this information at the physician's fingertips. And I think early on, and I think it still persists, that, they really are documentation and coding and billing tools. And EvidenceCare exists to sort of fill that void of bringing clinical insights and nudges into the physician's workflow in a way that we can help deliver better care to the patients and also create value for the health system in terms of efficiencies and clinical outcomes. And that's really the purpose of our platform.
And why would a healthcare provider be interested or should be interested in your company?
When I was on the revenue cycle side for many years, like many I'll say clinicians, right? Non-nurses, non-doctors, everyone wants to complain about doctors, not spending enough time with them, not doing their job, getting paid too much money, and then on the other side of the fence, physician walks in, they spend half the time looking at a computer and they're not even looking at me in the face as a patient. And when I met Brian and started getting into the clinical side of it and started spending many, many hours raising capital from physicians and partnering with the large medical societies out there in different specialties, you learn very fast that, the EMRs, the government, different mandates are shoved down physicians and nurses' throats every day. The time necessary to do their job gets diminished significantly. And, they're spending less and less time with their patient, more and more time just trying to document so the hospital can get paid for the services they provide. So as we started going down this journey, we realized, like, if we don't help physicians do their jobs better, these problems are just going to persist. So at the core of what we do, and one of the reasons I love the passion for what Brian had initially was, doctors, they're people, they've got family and kids and houses and lives and mortgages, and they can't keep up with the literature and the content. And it's just tough. And they're working 12, 15-hour days, not getting lunch breaks and getting more put on them from every angle under the sun. So the reason that someone should look to consider using our platform is to really, what Brian mentioned earlier, help them do their jobs better. And we believe at the core of who we are as a company, if we can help physicians do their jobs, i.e. treat patients and get some of that noise out of their face every day, a lot of the problems, the systemic problems we see in healthcare, especially when it comes to the financial situation in healthcare, well, not everything, but a lot of it will take care of itself.
Brian, you said earlier that EvidenceCare is agnostic to the EMR, I presume. We're actually at my organization in the process of making the switch to the Big E, like many other organizations are. Tell us what's the difference between having really good order sets and then having EvidenceCare, I presume, either layered on top or off to the side.
A lot of health systems have put a lot of time and energy trying to optimize their EHR. They've spent hundreds of millions of dollars on it. So there's a perception of, well, we spent so much on this, we should just be able to do everything right within that native system. But the problem with order sets specifically, Rick, that you mentioned is an order set doesn't help me take better care of a specific patient. If we have an order set for pneumonia or COPD, okay, here's the library of options for meds and imaging and labs that I may want to consider for this patient, but it's really not helping the physician get to what is the best for this patient that I'm treating right now. And that's where our system is a little different in that, we're pulling data from the EHR, recognizing what clinical condition and severity and risk factors that patient has, and allowing the physician to get a very simple view of what is evidence-based for this particular patient.
How many people work for you now?
40, Brian. I think we're just hovering under 40, Rick.
And so there must be a business side and a clinical side and then kind of an in-between. So how do you know, besides there's still money in the bank, A, that you're successful, B, that there's a growth path, and then what to do next?
When you think you're successful, life smacks you in the face first thing in the morning. You wake up and you got about 2 weeks of cash in the bank and 20 people to pay, which has happened to Brian and I many times. And you just have to have that drive and passion for what you do every day. And we started off with a web-based version of Clinical Pathways, and we had a great user base around the world at emergency medicine. But then we realized quickly that you've got to get in the EMR. Otherwise, it's not going to work. So everything we did kind of just got, lack of a better word, sunsetted. And then we went in the EMR, and then you get certified by the big EMRs and their app models and app stores and all that. So that's a win. And then you get an innovative healthcare system as a partner, and that's a win. But then you run out of cash, you got to raise more money. So you're like, oh, we start over. So it's, claiming one thing, Brian, I think I'll speak for Brian. One thing we didn't do well along the journey was celebrate wins, right? And everything in a small company needs to be celebrated, just like in a good relationship in general. And we didn't do enough of that. We just kept grinding and raising capital and building product. And Brian's got just some of the best, most amazing ideas for ways to help physicians do their jobs better, quicker, easier, faster. But in the world we live in, you got to stop and do something well. And we were very fortunate to bring on our current COO, Amy Deaton, who, when she came on, Brian and I were doing, 17 things. And we kind of came down and we said, like, let's just do these 3 things and do them very well. And then through COVID, Brian and I made a decision, and I give Brian a ton of credit, to bring on a CEO to help us grow the company to the next level. Because even though 2 people, business and clinical, are good at what they do, we're good at what we do, right? And there's things we just don't know because we haven't done it before. And we were blessed to bring on a CEO who not only has been amazing for the company, but just a good process and culture person. We haven't lost a person in years. People really are dying to come work for the company. And one thing he makes us do every week is we celebrate wins.
Brian?
When we first started it, we'd already mentioned, this was our kitchen tables, this was coffee shops. We had our first, kind of 5-6 employees. We were a small team, and everybody was wearing every hat. Everybody was doing everything. And then it's just been interesting to see that evolution as we've grown as a company. Back to your question, Rick, we now have, a product team, an implementation team, an engineering team, a client success team, a marketing team, a sales team, and now, Bo's brought such great processes to operating the business to the point where every employee has milestones every quarter that if you execute on these 2 or 3 milestones, these will be big wins over the next quarter. That's 40 people in the company that all have those 2 or 3 things. And that's where now over the last 18 months, we've just grown in efficiency and scale and impact in every area of the business.
What do you see for the future? And tell me where you think AI and things like ChatGPT, those kinds of things, are going to fit.
I think our biggest challenge, and Jim, I'd be interested to hear your perspective here, is just the headwinds in healthcare. And it's a challenging market right now. Every health system is struggling. Every health system has major initiatives in terms of, whether it's an EHR conversion, an EHR upgrade, implementation of an ERP system or CRM. And so there's a lot going on. And so as a digital health company, you have to make sure that you're positioning yourself to sort of bubble up to the top as a priority. And that's challenging. We have health systems that, love our tools, love the value it delivers, but they're, like, hey, we just can't do this for a year. And as a small company to say, hey, we're just going to sit in our hands and wait for a year for a health system that we know could be a great client, that's hard. And I think everybody recognizes that just those headwinds are going to continue, probably as, maybe a little market downturn, hospital margins are tight, workforce challenges. It's going to take probably a few years for healthcare to sort of stabilize coming out of COVID. And I think that's probably our biggest challenge. I don't know, Jim, if you have anything to add there.
The only thing I'd add to that, Rick, is I think the biggest headwind for us as a company, specifically to address that question, is getting everything Brian mentioned. But then at the end of the day, you have a solution that are for physicians or nurses to take better care of their patients. But when healthcare systems are just sucking the demand out of their time all day, every day, and everywhere but actual patient care, anything you put in front of the physician is going to be met with resistance. And even though it adds value to you, or it adds value to your patient, or to the financial bottom line of the healthcare system, our job is to find ways to continue doing what we're doing, but to make it even easier for those physicians. If we help them make a better care decision, or reduce the amount of utilization they're providing for a patient because it's not necessary, or find a financial value proposition should the patient be put in the hospital or sent home or going somewhere else, those are all great. But even if it saves you 15, 20, 30 minutes after that, not talking to 5 other people, calling your peers, it's still 1 or 2 things you have to do now on the front end, right? So how do we help as a company, and I believe as an industry, but for EvidenceCare specifically, how do we help those that help us every day make their jobs easier? And that it just, even though we get more innovative and have better solutions and automate more for the physician in their workflow, they're still getting 100 different things thrown at them every day. They're short-staffed, they're burnt out, they're frustrated. I think Brian told me about a year ago, a statistic came out around COVID, 80% of his peers in emergency medicine wouldn't recommend their specialty to their family and friends. That's a tragedy in healthcare. I mean, that's really unfortunate. How do we solve that problem? And the only way to do that is to help them do their jobs better.
So AI.
Yeah, we're I would say cautiously bullish on AI, and by cautiously meaning obviously in healthcare you're working in a special environment where you got to worry about PHI security, and I think there's some hurdles that AI needs to get over there. FDA clearance. We know everybody's sort of waiting for the FDA to come out with some. They say they're coming out with some new guidelines pretty soon on this topic. So I think everybody's going to start dabbling in it. Everybody's going to start seeing, what can we do with our tooling and apply AI to come up with, whether it's better insights, whether it's automation of certain things that can be automated. We're starting to look at that on our platform. But I think right now it's just a little early because there's a little uncertainty around, those concerns. But once we get over the hump with, assuring that we have those security, PHI, FDA compliant tooling, and that tooling can be applied, then I think it's off to the races, because there's so many different use cases where it could be helpful for physicians in their workflow and helping to automate things.
Yeah, my take on the whole thing, and this is just from a business perspective, not a clinical. I think there's a lot of use cases for machine learning. I mean, I think there's a lot of things you can automate, and that can speak for itself. And on the AI, especially the Chat GPT thing, I mean, I think I am a little concerned about that. You look at what a lot of the big tech experts around the world are signing petitions right now to slow down a bit, right? Because there are things that I think there's harm that can cause. You look at even Zuckerberg and Facebook over the years, like we've pulled away from society by having people on their phones all day, every day. And when it comes to clinical practice, one thing I learned from Brian early on, no matter how good your technology is, no matter how much you can automate stuff, no matter how much you can make documentation easier, at the end of the day, the physician should be the captain of the ship. Like, there are things you can just look at a patient with clinical gestalt and see that I don't care what your documentation or that clinical pathway tells me, there's something wrong with this patient. I need to fix it, right? So there's got to be a fine line somewhere in there to allow physicians to always be the captain of the ship, but using technology to do some of the automation and clinical documentation, things that they shouldn't be bothered with. That's fine. I think that's a great way to go forward. But to have, if we say we can fly a plane with never having somebody in the cockpit, no matter what, that's going to concern me, right? And that's kind of where I see things going clinically. So to Brian's point, cautiously optimistic is a great way to say it.
Great analogy, Jim. Brian, it's always puzzled me why diagnosis hasn't been on the table in digital health. I mean, there's Isabella, there's been a couple of, very niche kind of attempts, but is it fear of malpractice? Is it fear of litigation, or is it just too complicated? And is AI AI should be great at pattern recognition. That's a big part of making a diagnosis. Why do you think it hasn't taken off? And is Are we getting to an inflection point?
I think that's probably the area that is furthest away. And watch I say that, and next week something will change. But it is my belief as a physician that the assessment and diagnosis of a patient is where the human element of the art of medicine comes in. I think so much can be automated on the back end of that. And as Jim mentioned, the administrative burden of documentation and all those kinds of things are perfect applications for AI. But I'm going to steal, I interviewed Stan Huff, former CMIO at Intermountain, on our podcast about a month ago. And he really, answering the same question, had a great perspective on it, which is, I think if we get to the point where AI is really helping physicians in their workflow in healthcare, that then makes the art of physical exam patient assessment even more important, and allows physicians to then spend more time on that human element of medicine if all those other things are then being taken care of on the back end. It makes that diagnosis so essential.
So we're getting to the end of our time. I'd like each of you to give a brief summary of the important things a startup should be aware of, and how you guys approach that.
In terms of lesson learned, I would tell early entrepreneurs, you're going to need 5 to 10 times the capital that you think you need. I can remember, where we thought, geez, if we could just raise $1 million, this would be all we would ever need to grow this company. And we've now raised more than 20 times that. And, building a company the right way, in an industry that has as much complexity as healthcare has, takes good people, takes time, and you need the capital in the runway to be able to do that.
Yeah, there's not much I can add. At the end of the day, Rick, I think the number one thing a founder needs is grit. It's going to suck. I mean, days are going to be horrible. You're going to hate it, but you have to wake up the next day and be excited and motivated. And, Brian and I have raised capital from pretty much everyone in Nashville, a ton of healthcare systems. Like, I don't think we have a family or a friend, we can go to dinner and can't see someone. I'm like, hey, how's business? And then you always got to be on. Like, you're never off. And then you got to come home and try to be on for your family and your friends. And it's tough because you one thing I learned a long time ago from fellow entrepreneur is, when somebody asks you a question on how to solve something, an entrepreneur never tells an entrepreneur how to solve a problem. They say, hey, here's something that happened to me and here's how I handle it, right? People want to always give you advice. And unless they're a mentor, unless they've been there, it's hard to really receive that well, because you're like, okay, I've tried it 80 times and it just doesn't work. So something different. But it really does come down truly 100% to grit and the people that you employ. And I don't think Brian and I had enough experience early on to realize how valuable people are. Because no matter how good your technology is, no matter how great your marketing and sales team is, if you don't have, at the end of the day, the people are building it, the people are selling it, the people are integrating it. And it's just hard. I mean, that's all there is to it. And you just got to love it. You have to have a passion for it every single day. And I think one of the things I would also add is, early on, Brian and I did not do a good job of is leveraging our mentors, investors, and board members for help. When you're focused in the business, you're not focused on the business. And when you're just trying to raise capital, build a product, or release something, or do something, your board and investors are there to help. They've got networks, they've got people, they got money, they got friends, they got relationships. Use them, hold them accountable, especially if they have equity in the company. They're incentivized to help you be successful. And we just got so buried in trying to do it ourselves that I think we missed a few opportunities early on to get some really insightful knowledge and understanding of how we can do something better. There's always a better way to do it. But if you don't lift your head up from the business long enough to just ask the question, people want to help, right? We're all here to help people. And that's why we're in this phone here. We want, in this call podcast, we want to help others do something better for the industry, for themselves, for the family, for their friends. And Brian, I've been extremely fortunate to have some of the most amazing friends and investors in healthcare we could ever ask for. But we didn't do a good job early on. We're doing it now, but we didn't do a good job early on in leveraging that network.
Well, this has been absolutely terrific. Thank you. If Gary were still around, he'd be patting me on the head saying, good job picking these guys. Thanks for that. And again, just absolutely terrific.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate your time, Rick. Good seeing you, sir.